And in view of the need to compress time and get back to the time as described in the program, not as we are kind of ending up shifting things. I know there are colleagues online that must be getting jittery because also, and they are abroad, they are out of the continent or elsewhere. So without even going into too many details, may I invite Mr. Michael Higgins to then in turn invite the speakers for the session on reform of global governance. And this session, we've also asked our colleague Paul Nantulia from the African Center for Strategic Studies from Washington, D.C. This session will last 40 minutes, so I think you can take over.
I just want to make sure all of the participants are here. So we have James Shikwati, and James is going to come up and join us, and also Professor Makaria Munene.
Sorry, I think a colleague has just pointed out something. We do not have parallel sessions now. We have the session that was to happen in the morning, which we pushed to afternoon. I guess I'm not explaining well. So there are no parallel sessions at now. The parallel sessions are coming after this session. This session was supposed to be in the morning, but we had to accommodate the health session. And so we are trying to recover time. And as I mentioned, I spoke to this gentleman to accommodate us. So we are all here now. Don't go by the time in the program. As soon as we finish this, we'll get back to you to explain. Thank you very much. Yeah.
We also have Tatiana Karianis, who hopefully will be joining us online. I don't know if we can technically check with her. Is she available?
Michael, I am. I just can't see you on stage. We've lost the image.
Probably to your benefit. No, no, Tatiana, thank you so much for joining us. We now have all of the guests. So this session today is about geopolitics, reform of the United Nations, and global governance. And it's coming at a really interesting time. A few weeks ago in New York, the Pact for the Future happened, which was where all the different countries of the world came together to try to, acknowledging the Sustainable Development Goals were off track, acknowledging technology was a major factor that hadn't been addressed, and also acknowledging that the United Nations wasn't where it could be. They kind of came together, acknowledging the present challenges we were facing. Now, from that session, you had a few kind of half positive, half commitments, actually in a large extent due to African voices. So you had a sense that there's a half commitment to better representation at the Security Council, to reform of the international financial institutions, and also for work on debt relief. But really the elephant in the room in these discussions is that the United Nations is almost in an existential crisis. It's really under strain, as is the African Union. We've seen a resurgence of Cold War dynamics. We've seen a descent of a kind of a transactional mindset in international relations. And we've also seen that it's not just the United Nations is the arena where important things are being discussed as well. We've seen the emergence of BRICS as the BRICS initiative as a potential site of change in the world order. So that puts us in this is the position. So I'm very glad actually our contributors today, each of them is from a different background, but I think each of them can really contribute with insight to the topics we're having today. So from, I think it's New York, Tatiana Karianis is joining us. She's the Global Affairs and Tech Advisor from the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton. And Tatiana is actually an expert on Africa-UN relations, and also issues like peace operations, and also African engagement in our Chinese engagement in Africa. We're very lucky today. We have Professor Makaria Munene, the Professor of History and International Relations at the UN's International University of Kenya. What's really interesting about the professor is he's he's been engaging for many years about how the Kenyan perspective on international relations. He also he's a great insight in how geopolitics, the geopolitical landscape more broadly affects Africa. How he also is great on peace and security issues in Africa as well. Alongside him, we have James Shikwati, the Executive Director of the Inter-Regional, I'm going to get this, Inter-Regional, can you, James, what's it? The Inter-Regional Economic Network. As well as that, James is also, through his role in his publication, African Executive, he's been really shaping discourse in Africa. And in particular, he's been really good at moving beyond aid as a conversation and looking at how trade rather than aid perhaps could be shape the international relations and maybe be an avenue through which African voices can be empowered. We also have a new addition to the panel is Paul Nantulia. He's a research associate at the African Center for Strategic Studies in the United States. He's been very engaged on both Chinese and Southeast Asian engagement with Africa, and also has a speciality in mediation, peace processes, and governance. So I just wanted to briefly set the scene, introduce some of our participants, but I also know that because Tatiana is participating virtually and from New York, we might start off with a very brief presentation from Tatiana about the African Union and UN relations, and also a look at peace support relations in Africa. So Tatiana, if it's okay, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you. And thanks to Bob and the other organizers for the invitation to join you. I'm sorry I'm not in Nairobi with you all. I would rather be in Nairobi than in New York, but so be it. Thank you, Michael. I will try to be brief. I wanted to look at new directions for peace operations in Africa, and also look, as Michael, you said, UN AU partnerships around this activity. I'm going to make really three points. One on the changing nature of violent conflict, another on trends in peace support operations in Africa, and then highlight some of the challenges. Now, if the first decade of the 21st century was really the decade of peacekeeping, or the golden age of peacekeeping, this last decade has ushered in the crisis of peacekeeping, and this has been accompanied by a crisis of confidence in multilateralism itself, and this is both due to the limited success of large multidimensional UN-sponsored missions to bring an end to conflicts, but also to a divided UN Security Council, to this return of Cold War geopolitics. And this has challenged the UN's effective response to end violent conflicts around the world. So it's not surprising that we've been seeing growing calls for reforming the UN Security Council and UN peace operations. And we've seen the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, come out with a full-throated endorsement of 2 permanent seats from the African continent on the Security Council. But really, what has complicated action by collective action by the UN is that really since the end of the Cold War, that most violent conflicts conflicts have increasingly been structured around complex transnational networks that really link a diversity of actors inside and outside the region. And these conflict networks have a global reach, even as they may produce local violence. And so the peacekeeping toolkit has been really challenged. It doesn't fit well. As we see, MONUSCO's been in the DRC for 24 years, MONUSCO in CAR for over a decade, and the violence continues. Now, there's a lack of new ideas, and so we've seen, at least in New York, the new agenda for peace, the recently adopted Pact of the Future, and the UN Secretary General, for that matter, all really walking away from UN peacekeeping as the UN's key tool for conflict management. So instead, what we've seen is an emphasis on partnerships with regional organizations, calling for peace operations to be led by regional organizations rather than the UN. And we've seen proposals to elevate the role of the Peace Building Commission, but we really don't have any new ideas coming out of the sort of the New York ecosystem. Now, since about half of the UN peacekeeping missions operating around the world are in Africa, the issue of UN-AU partnerships isn't new, but this idea is gaining new momentum in debates about UN reform, given the growing consensus that UN peace operations are failing. So what are the trends for peace operations in Africa that we see today? Well, first, there's been no UN Security Council authorized UN mission in Africa in close to a decade. With the drawdown of MINUSMA in Mali, the UN has only 5 active missions on the continent. It's MONUSCO, UNMISS, sort of the big three, the remaining big three, and the smaller MINURSO and UNIFSA. In contrast, over the same last decade, the AU and other regional bodies have authorized 16 new peace operations. In fact, since 2000, regional organizations have authorized a total of 38 African-led peace operations, 2/3 of these by the AU, which has authorized a total of 22. The second trend is toward more peace operations authorized and led by sub-regional organizations, such as ECOWAS, the EAC, or SADC, with varying degrees of support from the AU and international actors. And the third trend is around financing. One of the key obstacles for African-led peace operations historically has been the lack of adequate, predictable, and sustainable financing of AU-led operations. And this changed last December when the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 2719 that approved a framework for the financing of African Union peace support operations out of UN assessed contribution. This represents significant progress in this partnership in peace and security, but again, the details have yet to be worked out. The first peace operation funded under the scheme is the SADC mission in the DRC, SAMI-DRC, that's headed by South Africa to address the Rwandan-backed M23 rebellion. But again, as we've seen, if the lessons from, for example, the Great Lakes provide any lessons, the success of regional peace operations really is context specific. And we can talk a little bit about some of those specific challenges and lessons from the Great Lakes. But of course, the benefits are that African-led PSOs may have more interested actors, may be quicker to deploy, more ready to take casualties and risks. In fact, in the DRC, just a few months ago, 2 South African peacekeepers were killed, dozens were injured in a mortar attack. But they're not immune to the challenges faced by UN peace operations, from unrealistic or overambitious mandates, to inadequate resources and capacities, to issues of command and control, to host consent, and even sometimes to the absence of effective leadership. So, and then on top of that, when you have a region that's politically divided, as we see in the Great Lakes, any peace operation led by one sub-regional organization and composed posting troops from some countries in the region and not others may not be seen as impartial by some actors. So this, the backyard peace operations are not necessarily a simple solution or a panacea, but that's the future direction of peace operations we see in Africa. So just to wrap up, I think it's not surprising that the final draft of the Pact of the Future calls for the need for more thinking about the future of peacekeeping, essentially kicking the can a bit further down the road. And I would suggest that whoever's at the table offering new ideas will help shape the next generation of peacekeeping and help shape the reform of this really critical tool. And it's clear that the UN has again become the battleground of ideas, whether it's around AI, peacekeeping, international norms. And so I would urge us to think creatively and to make sure that African scholars and expert practitioners are at the table and insist to be at the table to help reform this tool. So let me leave it there.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Just on that point, and as you said, there's a certain failure of imagination at New York. There's also limitations in terms of peacekeeping experience or new forms of peacekeeping experience, and some of the in terms of peacekeeping and peace support operations, it's African-led missions. So just on that point, I know Paul, we brought you to talk about a number of topics, but I know you do have an expertise in terms of peace processes, mediations, and peace support operations. So in terms of, do you have anything to contribute at this particular conversation about the future of peace support operations, or what we might expect to see in the years ahead?
No, thank you very much. First of all, I feel a lot of pressure on my shoulders because my professor, Macharia Munene, he taught me for 4 years. I'm a product of the Kenyan education system. So there's a lot of pressure on me to perform on this platform. Yeah. So if I don't sound as confident as I was in the morning, please understand. Look, let me just say two things. I think African countries are going to continue to value peacekeeping, as well as peace support and peace building operations, for a number of reasons. One, participation and influence and engagement and capacity to participate in these missions is an avenue through which African countries can increase their muscle, their diplomatic muscle, and influence at the international level. I mean, since the years of independence, African countries have always been trying to look for a way in which they can leverage their strengths within the international system. United Nations is one of them. African countries, I mean, you know, there are many African countries that basically punch way above their weight at the UN and invest heavily in the UN and UN diplomacy for the simple reason that it's almost as if the United Nations is some kind of equalizer when it comes to that power dynamic. I mean, small countries like Rwanda punches way above its weight in terms of countries that are making serious troop contributions to peace missions. And we've seen that sometimes that is even used strategically whenever Rwanda feels that there's pressure, it's facing pressure from the international community, it always threatens, to pull its troops out. Not that it intends to do so, but it's trying to use its leverage. Rwanda is not an isolated case. There are many other African countries that do similar things. So I think, looking at the future, problems notwithstanding, I think peace support operations, peace missions, and peace-building missions are going to continue to be valuable to African countries. What does that mean for external partners? What it means is that a policy that supports, enables, and enhances the United Nations is a policy that will land well in an African capital. But a policy that that is perceived to undermine or to denigrate UN officials, to denigrate UN institutions, is not a policy that will land well. And we can cite a number of examples, where African countries, for instance, rose in defense of Kofi Annan. There was a time when Kofi Annan was facing a lot of pressure, and we saw the kind of really strong push by African countries to defend this African Secretary General of the United Nations. Africa has supplied the UN with very, very serious and highly respected diplomats. So I think that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is I think African engagement with UN institutions has also been an avenue for exerting some serious agency. So for instance, there are a number of things that African countries have been unhappy about when it comes to peacekeeping. Rather than shun peacekeeping, they have sponsored and participated in many and even introduced resolutions to engage in peacekeeping reform discussions, of which one of the most significant is the Brahimi report, which was led by this Algerian diplomat. And so one can see that, African countries will not be shy to talk about the problems they feel the United Nations has, but nevertheless, the approach has been to strengthen, to increase participation and to increase influence. The third point, and I think I'll stop here, is to basically paraphrase the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Naledi Pandor. And she made a very important speech a few months before she stepped down as foreign minister, where she was responding to a question about South Africa's and Africa's strategic thinking with regard to global reform and global multilateral issues. And she made it very clear that South Africa and its African partners look at the United Nations multilateral system as the most legitimate system. So the approach would be to participate and strengthen. South Africa, she said, would not entertain efforts to damage or to dismantle the system because there's no alternative to the UN multilateral system. So I think that's critically important, and it really shapes a lot of the behavior that we see from African diplomats at the UN. Yes, they'll be critical, but I think this relationship is going to continue to be strong. I think that all indications suggest that the United Nations is going to continue to be strategically important to African countries. And this issue of peacekeeping is also quite vital. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Based on what you said about your professor, I might bring a question to you next, Professor. You're not only an expert on international relations, but you're also a historian, and you've seen an appreciation of the long span of international relations. I was just wondering briefly if you were prepared to just tell us a little bit about either Africa or more even Kenya's engagement with its arc over time in terms of geopolitics, and where you might see, looking ahead to the future, how Kenya, perhaps even in particular, might fit into the geopolitical landscape.
Thank you. Glad to be among giants. And so I'll try to say the little bit that I know, or I think I know. See where Kenya fits into the world dynamics, geopolitics. It's about 80 years since the creation of the United Nations, created for a different purpose from what exists today. And it's created with the two organs that are not equal, the General Assembly and the Security Council. And the purpose of the Security Council is to protect the interests of the big powers, those who have to be there. The General Assembly is more democratic, and some changes that have occurred in the General Assembly and not in the Security Council. Now, at the time of the creation of the United Nations and its two divisions, there was no such a country as Kenya. And many in Africa did not exist because they were property of one European or another. So they were subsumed in that context of being property. Now, the decolonization that took place, mainly in the 1950s and 60s, that allowed people called Africans to join the United Nations, the General Assembly, was momentous in itself. And yes, in the colonial times, many colonies looked up to the United Nations. Not the Security Council, but the General Assembly, that something may be raised about their concern. What used to be called Kenya, before it became Kenya, there was an outbreak of a war, the Mau Mau War. And one of the peculiar things was that the British and the Americans entered an MOU that the Mau Mau would not be discussed at the United Nations. At the same time, on the other side, people are looking for ways to have their voice heard in the United Nations, the General Assembly. So the United Nations became a focus for people who wanted to decolonize. Now, decolonization, as we understand it, was really a racial matter in the final analysis, because colonialism was racialism. And so we had those people fighting against colonialism, they were fighting against racism, which made it possible when political colonialism was eliminated, you just put black people where white people were and called it independence. Now that created problems afterwards. Yeah? So how come there is this continuity of what we didn't want? Now, at the United Nations, when the Africans came in big numbers, especially after 1960, the so-called Year of Africa, there was some discussion, serious discussion, what will the international order be like? They were not used to having all these black people or Africans. Before that, talking of Africa used to mean South Africa. After that, South Africa became anathema. In fact, it was sidelined. But Africa then came to mean former colonies. And it is those former territorial colonies that have been in the forefront of trying to force change in the United Nations. And they succeed through the General Assembly, but not the Security Council. They were instrumental in putting the People's Republic of China into the United Nations as opposed to Taiwan. They were instrumental in trying to change the socio-economic and media dynamics, the UNESCO thing. Unfortunately, it didn't go very well because the people with money cut off the money and said, no, you can't. There's a limit to what you can do. Which brings up the issue. As much as we want to be part of this, to have a voice, we need to realize that the big boys who have all the money have a habit of doing strange things if they don't think they should allow it. Point in mind, Western Sahara, the Sahrawi issue. The United Nations has been very clear, as far as I'm concerned. But who keeps it on the side and not making progress? It is France and the United States. funding and supporting Morocco for whatever reason, the aggression there. Can the United Nations do anything about it? It has tried. And these are not willing to budge. Recently, we had the issue of the Israeli operations in Gaza and Lebanon. The ICC claimed that it was going to indict the prime minister. When the people are indicted from Africa, there is happiness. This time, they say, no, in fact, you are going to be in trouble for trying. So, these double or triple standards are there in operations. Now, as a country, Kenya has tried its best. From the time of independence in 1963, it became independent with a reputation as a revolutionary country, the Mau Mau country. And there were expectations that it was going to be a revolutionary country, because it didn't turn out that way, but the reputation did not hurt. And that reputation might have helped it to gain advantage. The reason the Nairobi hosts the only UN offices outside the US and Europe is because of the diplomatic acumen of some people, exploiting the opportunities. We had Odara Joy was very good at that. So that's the reason Nairobi hosts about 2 headquarters. No other country in the global south does that. So it used its UN positions very well. It has held positions in the Security Council about 3 times. I think the last one, which some people remember, with Martin Kimani making a name for himself, complaining about the Russians in Ukraine. And I think thereafter he got a good job. So what I'm saying is that in its small ways, Kenya has had some impact on the world stage. And it does not hurt to say that we are very good athletes. So if we don't do anything else, we know how to run. And so you have all the play of the national anthem regularly. So what I'm saying is that Kenya, more than many other countries in Africa, has had chance to make the mark and to have people raising questions or talking about it by design and sometimes by luck. But I think mostly by design in the past. Let me not go beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I know we could all probably stay for hours listening to you, but we don't have time, unfortunately. Something that struck me is when you said that for myself, that I've worked at the Security Council and the General Assembly, and one of the actual, you might call it, one of the arguments under the surface always in any discussion is the global South always want to have things done on what we might call an intergovernmental locus. So all the countries coming together to drive the agenda, whereas the global North will seek to use multi-stakeholder platforms or industry-led arrangements to determine the agenda of the discussions. But this is, I wanted to go now to Peter for a second, because often international relations is not just diplomatic relations. What really shapes the relations between countries is the economic relationships they have. And I know you've written and spoken about how trade can shape relations between countries. So I might just offer the microphone over to you to talk a little bit about that, Peter.
Well, thank you. It's difficult to speak after Professor. He's covered the ground. I thank the organizers for this forum. What I'd like to bring on the panel maybe is some new thinking, right? And what do I mean by new thinking? Following up on what Professor has described,
we are in a moment in history where the famous saying that the king is naked is happening right before our eyes. And Professor has given us the history of how the UN was formed. We know the United States of America played a great role and has continued to play a great role as a patron, if I may say indirectly, a patron of the United Nations system. And if you look at the value system that drives the UN, they are very much American, if we may call them so, or liberal system. So the new thinking I'm bringing on the table is the role of new technology and how it's going to alter the international governance system. And in this case, I'm looking at artificial intelligence. I think it's been addressed early in the morning. And I'm specifically looking at how artificial intelligence, or what others want to call digital technology, impacts on democracy. Because every country in the world keeps saying we are democratic. And if you ask them, what do you mean by being democratic? They say, well, we practice the will of the people. So if we interrogate the power of digital technology, artificial intelligence, on how people think and how people make decisions, is the world of the future going to remain democratic? Because we're looking at a possibility where one person seated on a keyboard somewhere can influence how Kenyans think, and Kenyans will even think they have made their own decisions, yet there's somebody somewhere else manipulating how they're making those decisions. So if we peg our evaluation on the power of artificial intelligence to influence how we think, number one, or to grant the power to the government to control how we think, number two, then we can see that obviously the future of the international governance systems is not going to be the same anymore. It's going to take after the image of whoever will control that artificial intelligence system. So in this case, we're looking at the competitions around the world. I think the US is ahead on this, China as well, and other powers are also coming into play when it comes to artificial intelligence. So in projection, we can easily conclude that the future of the international governance system will very much take after whoever will be the winner in the artificial intelligence technology. Then to conclude now with your question about the trading system, what we've seen has been the clamor from the South that the global trading system is rigged in its current format. We've had our leaders keep asking for the reform of the global finance system in the sense that we see the emergence of other actors such as the BRICS that are talking about alternative ways of trading without necessarily making use of the US dollar. And lastly, we've seen what I'll refer to as the non-government consequential actors, meaning if you look at X, it used to be called Twitter. This is a private initiative, company, profit-making, but it has great influence beyond United States, if you look at Facebook. So when we look at the future of the international governance system, I think, just to conclude, I'm looking at technology, especially artificial intelligence, the non-state actors, such as this big Twitter or X players, and then now for African agents in this. And this was, I think, addressed with the gentleman in the morning, is where do we place ourselves in the research, in the artificial intelligence value chain, if we may use such a term, and be able to leverage maybe the small window of opportunity that exists right now that no clear winner is in control. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I know we're quite stuck for time. I hope people will be able to contact the different participants separately if they want to engage on their different topics. One thing Peter, as soon as he said it, William Gibson said, technology is neutral, and as soon as it's used, it becomes political. So there's a kind of, how the technology that's emerging is used is going to be very important in shaping things. And I think one of the things this conference was about, amplifying African voices. And I think we shouldn't forget that the rhetorical high point for the United Nations is all those African leaders who went to the UN in the 50s, 60s, 70s. This was probably the high point of the United Nations. And if you go back, if you want to hear a good speech, these are the people who probably spoke better than any other humans have ever spoken about issues of humanity. And hopefully we'll get to a point where those African voices are once again leading the dialogue. And as Peter and others were saying, we're in this kind of volatile, uncertain moment, but that doesn't mean it can't be seized, and that also presents opportunities. So thank you very much to all the participants today. I know ideally we'd like to offer more questions out to the floor, but I think in the interests of time, we might just end it here, unless. So I will pass it over now.
And again, as with the other sessions, you can be certain that we can have a 3-day conference on the topic before us here, reform of global governance, reform of the UN agency. But unfortunately today, even though I'm a scholar, I am just a timekeeper. And I'm a poor timekeeper because I'm 1 hour late consistently since morning. So now I'm trying to get back to being within time. So with those few remarks, I'm sure we'll have wished to engage with James. I wanted to mention that James runs the Interregional Economic Network. Only recently we had a seminar on the topic. We produced some knowledge, some policy briefs. Paul, in addition to working on all these matters, also works on Africa, Americas, Africa, Latin America, African Caribbean, which is a whole topic on its own. But without justifying anything, a round of applause to Michael and to our colleagues. And thanks to the audience for not posing questions. We have saved us a couple of minutes, which we intend to put to very good use in terms of, yeah. Thank you. Right. Okay, I think, of course, in the next, as we said earlier, this is the inaugural Amplifying African Voices conference, Amplifying African Voices for Strategic Action conference. When we meet next year, probably somewhere else, not Kenya, we'll make sure we have 3 days so that we have good discussions. But for now, I want to advise that we have 2 sessions, so they are parallel sessions. One session will be in a room right outside, on the right, I think is 03. This session will be led by Dr. Edward Kawezi. I believe I saw him somewhere here. Is he still around? And this session is kindly supported, sponsored by the Institute for Security Studies. There's in fact a colleague of ours, Dr. Cyril Obi, who's joining this session, and he's been waiting online. We do not want him to wait any further. So I suppose, colleagues on this panel, I'll ask that I believe Kabaso and my colleague Alan are there. They can lead you to the parallel room. The only reason we are taking you there is that the other panel, which is on AI and emerging technologies, is full. Is just half the panel is virtual, and we only have capacity, in this room for that. So, Dr. Kawezi, while you are away, I announced very ostentatiously and in a big way that you are leading, chairing, moderating this very powerful session on agencies in Africa's peace and security relations with external actors. So this is a geopolitics session from a security perspective. So as we let colleagues on this session move to the parallel session, I would like to invite, and I will, the provisions, anybody who feels like they want to listen to the security, peace and security issues, that will be your room. Those of us who stay here will work on, will listen to a session led by Dr. John Mahasi of Horizon Global, and this session is entitled Opportunities and Challenges for African Agency in Emerging Technologies, Artificial Intelligence, and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So essentially, this session is for the geeks, the people who are interested in matters ICT or digital technologies. And Dr. Mahasi, if he's here, he can come and lead the way. And we hope we'll recover some time. I can see my colleague and friend, Chris. He cannot move from here. Yeah. Yes. You can actually, you want to go and see, yeah? I think there's a colleague here, Robin Williams. I think you can, you can join us. Yeah. I'm almost thinking that I should take over Dr. Mahasi's role, but welcome, Robin, because you are here physically. Most of the other speakers are online. The IT team, can we confirm that there are colleagues online so that we can actually start? There is Seiram Avol. Is she visible? Yes. Tatiana is there, Dr. Tatiana Karayanis.
Yep, I'm here. I can't see you though, but I can hear you.
All right, no, we are going live shortly.
Okay.
Robin Williams is here. Sauya Mbabazi must be online. She's in person. Where is she though? Okay. And Olajide Julius Filuzi. So I think as someone finds Sauya Mbabazi, I believe we can actually start the session. Okay, so Tatiana, I think I was just panicking. Let's give them a few more minutes to organize. Be patient. We'll be kicking off shortly. Thank you.
stage is ours, just me and you. I'm good.
They thought you had abandoned ship.
No, 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 no. I'm here.
No, I think they said there's one more colleague here.
Yeah, but she's not well.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. Use this one. Good afternoon. You know, I love storytelling, so I'm going to tell you a brief story before we get to the subject matter. I have an interesting technology journey. The first time I interacted with a computer, I was above 20 years of age, so don't laugh at me, you know. It's the truth, the reality of how it was. And I remember for the first time, there's something we called the disk operating system, DOS. If you look at almost all modern technology applications, they are still running on the disk operating system, only that we have created a graphical user interface. We have improved the interfacing between the primary commands that we send to the machine and the input we give for processing. Then after that, there came something called WordPerfect. In particular, there was one that lasted for a very long time. It was WordPerfect 1995. Then to carry on with my technology journey, and I think the technology team might be sabotaging my story, but for now, let me try to finish it. The next time I interacted with the technology at a personal level was when I got my first laptop. And when I give you the description of this laptop, you'll think maybe I lived in the same era as the Flintstones, but I did not. They are in a different era, and I'm in a different era. My first laptop was not a clone. You know what a clone is, right? If you are holding anything in your hand other than an IBM, that's a clone. That was how technology defined an original computer from a clone. So I had an IBM laptop, and as I've told you, it's just about 24, 25 years ago when I had this laptop. And guess how much memory that laptop had? It had a memory of 1 gigabyte, 1 GB. I mean, I should have kept that laptop to bring it to this meeting today here to help me articulate this story. But between that time and now, technology has evolved massively. We rapidly found ourselves in the Internet of Things, and if you go to 3 years back, every organization, I need a mic, I need a mic, I need a better mic. 2 to 3 years ago, okay, let's hope. Is it better or not? It sounds not better. Does it sound better or not better? It's better. All right, good. So now, 3 years ago, 3 years ago, we went into the app madness, and every institution was developing its own app. We have as many apps now as there are organizations, and even more. But quickly, we left that space and entered the artificial intelligence space. And if you look at the trend within AI now, is that leading corporations are developing their own internal AI systems. The problem and the challenge, or the quagmire we have, is that whereas we are solving the problem of plagiarism from an AI perspective, we are creating another secondary problem of not having sufficient data to inform advancement, rapid advancement of these AI platforms to become authoritative enough and valid enough to be able to run the kind of applications and information needs that we are looking at. Very quickly, we are looking at opportunities and challenges for African agency in emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, and the fourth industrial revolution. I want my panelists, and I know there are those who are online, to introduce themselves. We'll start with Seyram Avle. Are you there? Seyram? Now, I hope this is not a technology challenge, because if it's a technology challenge, we are going to only have one participant contributing to this panel discussion. So on this one, you need to bail me out on the technology side, because most of my panelists here are participating virtually. Tatiana.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
I'm Tatiana Karyanis. I'm currently Global Affairs and Technology Advisor at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to have you with us here. Robin Williams.
That's me.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the organizers. It's been a great event thus far. I'm Robin Williams, and I'm a PhD candidate exploring the implications of the Fourth Industrial Revolution on the theory and practice of diplomacy. And I'm also the interim service line lead at Ipsos in South Africa, managing the Center for Development Research and Valuation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm told one of our discussants, Ms. Soya Mbabazi, is unable to be with us because of health reasons. We wish her a speedy recovery. Pole sana Soya. Olajide, Dr. Olajide Julius Filusi. If you can hear me, introduce yourself. Dr. Olajide. Professor Sairam, are you with us now? Okay, I'm told you are. Oh.
There's a little bit of a technical issue, but I think I'm in the right room. Yes, I see Tatiana, so I think that's correct. Okay. You want me to introduce myself?
Yes, please.
Or
Very quickly.
get started? Okay. I'm an associate professor in the communication department at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I'm also a Global Horizons Fellow currently at the Swedish Collegium of Advanced Study. And my work is on many things, but on the production and uses of digital technologies across parts of Africa, China, and the United States. I'm mostly interested in how people imagine technologies, what they do to bring them into reality, and what the implications are for various things such as labor. Thank you.
While they are with you, give us some insights on this. What are the current global trends with regard to artificial intelligence?
So I will say I'm primarily not an AI scholar, so I know others who have been following these trends a little bit more. So Dr. Karayanis will probably speak more on that, and so I'll make sure that I'll defer the specifics of that to her. My own work has been, or the most recent project I've been working on, has been looking at the ways that datafication, right? So the processes that bring people into kind of a datafied world, how that has been taking place across the continent. And so I've been looking at what are the various actors, companies, countries that are involved. This recent project has been looking specifically technologies, so Chinese-made technologies, and their significance across the globe and across Africa. And that work looks at datafication at various levels, but also in conjunction with what we understand to be happening from various sources. So, where are everyday people, particularly those at the bottom of the economic ladder, where are their lives becoming datafied, right? And so I'm not talking about, large-scale computing projects at, say, government or, university level, but how does a regular person's life become datafied, right? And most of this is happening through very simple technologies, such as the smartphones that we're using. And so the majority of the affordable smartphones that are available across the continent come from Chinese companies, Chinese manufacturers. This isn't to say that this is not true for the rest of the world. So your favorite computer, your favorite device from Apple is also made in China. And so when I speak of Chinese technology, I'm talking about Chinese brands that are sort of entering the African market as Chinese brands, right? Not on behalf of a third party such as Apple or a different company. And so the affordability technologies come from, is a key factor in this. And so low-cost smartphones are what the majority of Africans are getting online with. And so what happens there? So this project has been looking at various processes, such as, how do people sign up for things? What are the cameras that they are engaging with? So AI cameras, which is part of the question that you asked, are now commonplace on all of our devices. So if you turn your camera on, your camera will recognize you as so depending on what kind of system you have, the facial recognition allows the AI to identify you, right? Your identity. And this is facial recognition that has been going on for a long time. It's not a new technology. The only difference is that it is more affordable and in the hands of everyday people. Other areas of these applications include the daily applications that people need. So one of the most interesting cases we came across in this project was the financial apps that the majority of the people we interacted with were using. So this might be an app where you sell food in the market, or even you're just any regular office salaried worker and you need a short-term loan. You go online, and you come from various banks. So we did this project in Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya. Across the three countries, there were multiple apps that were providing short-term loans and financial resources to consumers. These are all available on primarily Android devices. Android is a Google-owned, or Alphabet, if you will, product, right? But these are on Chinese-made handphones. So there are two entities at stake here. So there's the Chinese-made native operating system and the native app. Some of these phones come with these applications, but in the Google Play Store, you encounter additional ones, right? And in our research, we find that these financial apps come from various places. They come from India, they come from Ireland, they come from China, and they come from the African continent. So these applications are fronting as financial instruments that provide financial resources to the average African, right? One of the sort of scary things that we encountered was what happens in exchange. So when you open this app, because financial institutions within the various countries don't offer low interest, low amounts, these applications become more interesting and more attractive. And so for no collateral, for nothing except giving access to, say, your address book, you are able to get access to a short-term loan that you pay back. Now, when you consent to that, what happens is that the institution at the other end gets access to the contact information and that is embedded in your address book. This is true for all apps. But what happens after is what we found to be interesting and unique to the countries that we were looking at. So say you default on this on the payment of this small amount. In some of the cases, what happened then was people in these address books then go breach of privacy on various levels, right? So first of all, a third party who I did not consent to me having the address book now has my phone contacts. Second, they are telling me privileged financial information about the person that gave them this contact, right? And so it was in these everyday interactions that this project discovered these
Prof.
challenges to its application. And so and like I said, Tatiana can speak more about AI-specific challenges, including with the cameras that are embedded on these phones. But my initial abstract and the work that I do is to sort of get this information of the everyday ways in which our lives become datafied for various entities,
I want to redirect your thoughts a bit, Professor. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hello?
Hello.
I see you raised your microphone, but I can't hear you.
I want
So
to.
you might have to.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, so I want to redirect your thoughts a bit. We have just about 2 minutes of your time left, and in these 2 minutes, hearing your conversation, clearly you have answered part of question 2 that I wanted to ask. Who are the dominant players in this space? And you are saying from a device perspective, we are looking at the Chinese controlling the market. And from a software or applications perspective, we are looking perhaps at American global giants, at least from a mobile telephony perspective. So these are the dominant players within this space. Do you see AI and other technology proliferations as giving advantage to African companies to be able, or African enterprises to be able to break into the big space of data and financial flows space, maybe with regards to financial systems? Thank you.
Right. I don't know that AI is the advantage, will bring the advantages that through various kinds of also big tech, right? And a lot of the AI developments are happening in open source, as recent sort of like the trend has been towards make some of this open source. But the dominant players remain companies and institutions that are quite large and are considered big tech, right? So a lot of the work is coming from Google, it's coming from OpenAI. These are all institutions that don't necessarily make their software as open. Some of it might be open source, but the majority of it is still within sort of an intellectual property domain. And so if we're talking global competition, the playing field is already not even. And so it's really hard to assume that because the technology has these advantages that people who or markets that don't already have a level playing field can enter and compete and have an advantage. So if we want to promote an African voice, I think part of it is strengthening some of the African tech entrepreneurial spaces. Some of the startups that are doing this work on the continent, sensitive to the needs of Africans, deserve support, right? But they are not getting the sort of support that their competitors in, say, Silicon Valley are getting. So a startup is not raising as much money as a Silicon Valley startup in order to be competitive. So if we want to be competitive, we have to look at some of the fundamental infrastructures of global finance that goes into global tech.
Okay, Prof. Sorry, I'll have to slow you down at that point. Thank you very much for your contribution. I think we are really pressed for time. The organizers have seen the challenge. Next time, probably we will do better time slotting to allow discussants to give valuable insights. Thank you so much, Professor. Yes, Dr. Tatiana, are you there?
I am here, yes.
Now, I want you to take 1 minute to, you have inherited a problem from Professor Sarah. I want you to take 1 minute of your 7 minutes to address that issue on the trends on AI before I can come now down to the specific issues that probably we had planned to discuss with you. So for now, just 1 minute. What are the trends in AI globally, and where do you see this taking the tech space probably in the near future?
Great, thank you. Well, if 2023 was the year the world took notice of AI, 2024 has been the year of global AI governance. So we've had two UN General Assembly resolutions that have been adopted on the principles by which AI should operate in global society. The recent Summit of the Future at the last UN General Assembly last month adopted the Global Digital Compact, emphasizing international cooperation on digital issues and knowledge and capacity sharing between the global north and the global majority. We've had a publication of a high-level UN report governing AI for humanity, which provided a slew of recommendations for effective multilateral governance of AI. We've had the emergence of international AI safety networks at AI safety institutes at national level and a network of AI safety institutes. The network has been created by the U.S. State Department and will be launched in November. And the African Union adopted an AI continental strategy, but with a 5-year implementation plan that, given the pace of AI developments, is, I think, woefully too long. And finally, we're gearing up for the upcoming AI Summit in France in February 2025, where the environmental impacts of AI are front and center.
Thank you. Sorry, we are pressed for time. So I have a mouthful of a question for you here. Where do you see opportunities for African enterprises in the fourth industrial revolution? What are the value chains of interest, and what value propositions can amplify African voices, including direct participation in global technology-driven commerce?
So what do I have? 2 minutes?
I'll give you 3.
Okay. No, thanks. I think in principle there are a number of areas where African businesses can thrive. I mean, there's everything from agriculture and agritech and fintech, financial inclusion, renewable energy and green tech, healthcare and health tech, education and e-learning. I mean, there really, again, I say in principle, because there are challenges, and I agree with Seram's analysis that that AI won't bring the kinds of advantages that we think it will, partly because again the playing field is already skewed. I think there are barriers and obstacles for African enterprises. First, there's the environmental and social impacts of these energy-intensive AI systems. They're very energy hungry. For example, data centers need a lot of land and a lot of water. So front of mind is how we make AI both socially beneficial for African communities, but also environmentally responsible. These are conversations where African voices need to be very much centered. There's also limited access to infrastructure, whether it's access to compute, access to energy, access to connectivity, all are still limited. There's a skills gap, a shortage of AI talent and training. There's an implicit bias in AI models, and there's limited access to financing. I think one 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 area that I've been thinking about is the current conversations about the global governance of AI and how to harness its benefits really approaches this through a very narrow development approach. Capacity building, knowledge transfers from the global north to the global majority. And I think we need to broaden our understanding of the AI stack to recognize the broader infrastructures that are essential for AI, from critical minerals and critical mineral sourcing to development and deploying. And there we see that Africa makes a significant contribution across the whole AI value chain. No, it's not, the African continent is not just a passive consumer of AI products. I mean, this is really an integrated ecosystem, and I think we need greater African representation in discussions about AI governance, given Africa's significance in it beyond the critical mineral piece in the value chain.
Thank you very
So
much.
let me just to say that I think we need to treat AI governance as a shared global responsibility, not just as a development project.
Lastly, in 1 minute, there is a way bushfires start and burn out. Do you see this AI hype kind of teeing off, having a sharp drop? Do you see the conversation continuing for too long? How does it look like if we are going into a conversation beyond AI?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part. You cut out of the first part of your
Yeah, I
question.
said sometimes a bushfire starts off and burns out very fast. Do we see the AI trend conversation becoming something that picks up extremely rapidly, and then within a year or two, no one is talking about AI anymore, we've moved on to something else, and what could that something else look like?
Yeah, I think it's a forest fire, not a bushfire. And I think it's already accelerated. It's the thing is that it's ubiquitous. It really cuts across all sorts of files. So I don't think this is short term. I think it has really built up momentum. The problem is it's moving. The conversations are moving so rapidly that we're all struggling to keep up. And unfortunately, as Professor Adler said, the cutting edge research is currently taking place not in universities, not in research institutes, but within big tech, and that operates very differently from governments and from universities. They move a lot faster. that the AI conversations are short-lived. I think the part of the problem is that they're now everyone is going to need to catch up in their own domains
All right.
and areas of work.
All right.
Thank
Thank you, Tatiana.
to catch up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to cut you short so that we move on
That's
to,
fine, that's fine.
yeah, to Ms. Robin Williams here to give us a bit of insights on a number of issues. And we are saying, what are the policy and geopolitical silencers of African voices on the technology front? And we are saying, think inside out, from outside, inside Africa, going outside. What are the silencers of African voices in this space?
Thank you so much, John. So there's definitely a few pressing ones, some more noticeable than others, but I think the big one that we're seeing is the over-reliance on foreign technology, technological infrastructure by industries, companies such as Google, Meta, Microsoft, and so forth. And the irony of me saying Microsoft while we sit in the Microsoft auditorium. But we're definitely seeing that about 99% of Africa's data is flowing through those undersea cables. So that, of course, affects our autonomy. And then, of course, we have a lack of representation on global tech bodies. And Tatiana had mentioned the significance of 2024 in terms of AI data governance. And we see, like, with organizations like the International Telecommunications Union, only about 5% of that is represented by Africa, which is, of course, a huge problem because it means that when they are sitting with policy development, they're not really taking into consideration the African context and priorities, which are, of course, important. And then the other two, which are kind of interlinked, I think, is the digital divide and access inequality, where only about 40% of Africa have internet access. Of course, internet penetration has grown significantly over the last few years, but it's still far from where it should be in comparison to the rest of the world. And not far from that is the economic barriers. In 2021, the African Development Bank had stated that about 1% of research and development funding comes to Africa. And that means that when African developers are working, they're working outside of the global ecosystem, and they're not able to contribute to that ecosystem, and therefore they're reliant on foreign investment, which also means that they are then aligning their work to the values and priorities of their foreign investors, of course. So, yeah, that's to sum it up.
What are the real socioeconomic implications for this at a global scale? This inequality, this isolation, you say the organizations working in this tech space within the African space are working outside the ecosystem. What are the implications? Who are the biggest victims?
So definitely a loss of digital sovereignty and an economic leakage. In 2021, there was about $1 billion that was lost in digital services in Africa. And then, of course, the fact that, like we said, Africa's autonomy is being, I should say our African voice is being diminished in this space, you know, with that external undersea cables that we're using. And then the exacerbation of global inequality is, of course, growing. And that's not just when we talk about internet access, but as we mentioned, there are innovators who are being excluded from a global system and that are working in silos. And then the vulnerability of geopolitical pressures. And like we said, the host countries who are now feeling that external pressure to develop policy aligned to the home countries of the likes of Meta, Google, Microsoft, and so forth. And then if we look at the key victims, I'd say it's us as the youth, those aged 15 to 34 who are the largest part of Africa's population, comprising of 60% of Africa's population, but only have about 30% access to, those only have 30% access to the internet. So that, of course, leaves consequences of the reduced employment opportunities, education opportunities, and entrepreneurship. So that's, of course, who suffers, not now, but in the long run, of course.
All right, one last question. How do SMEs, and the understanding of SMEs from an African perspective is not $50 million. It's really, let's talk of 50 million, between 5 million Kenya shillings to 50 million, and you can use a scale of about just 100 to convert into USD and see what an SME is like. how do they develop capability to harness the power of technology? Because really, the investment required, the research R&D and investment required for technology to power up African SMEs is a challenge. The challenge is that when systems are brought from elsewhere in the world, they are tailored to the specific commerce spaces that they are developed in. When they come here, you'll find the systems really don't serve the interests. How do local SMEs within the African space develop capability to leverage technology for success?
Thanks, John. Definitely not something I've explored significantly, but I think strategic partnerships are very crucial. And that's within Africa, you know, that's across universities, innovators, African corporations, government, and so forth, because I think the issue of working in silos, that's a big thing in Africa. And I just on the plane here, making my way from Ethiopia, from South Africa to Ethiopia to Kenya, there was I noted all of the big developments and achievements that are happening in Africa. But we see that there's a lot of silos that are happening. And Africa definitely, we've been solving problems for thousands of years. It's something that's inherent in African blood. So I think that's key, partnership.
Thank you very much. Dr. Olajide. Dr. Olajide? Is he online? Can we see him? Are you muted?
He's online, but muted.
You are muted. Can you unmute yourself? Check your audio settings, Dr. Olajide. Going once. Going twice. Hola? All right, let's give opportunity for one or two questions. If he manages to resolve the technology issues, then we will revert to him. Any questions for any of our panelists, either the one who is here or the ones online? Any questions? Doc, we can see you, but we still cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Very good. Introduce yourself very quickly.
Thank you very much. Dr. Olajide Julius Kilusi from the Department of Agricultural Extension and Rural Development and Doctor of Agriculture of Adamawa University in Nigeria. Should I go?
Thank you. That is enough. In the interest of time, I will give you your first question. What is the status of technology adoption in agribusiness value chains in Africa, given that the continent is an agribusiness dependent zone?
Okay, can I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. The state of technology adoption in Nigeria, as stated by research, the adoption is high because in Nigeria we discovered that hiking price of food commodities is in vogue, and scientists in their capacity investigated that what could be the reason for this hiking price of food commodities. So the scientists now came up with the development of technologies, using the smartphone, giving it to farmers so that it can help them. Because one of the problems they identified is that there is this problem of information asymmetry that's supposed to be getting to the farmers, but it is not being adequate. So they use technology to cover for this problem, and the adoption rate it was high. So the farmers they adopted it and they were utilizing it. And after it is being utilized, we still discover this problem of high price of food agricultural commodities still persists. That was what led to this study that, okay, what could be the cost? Despite the fact that the technology is being adopted at a very high rate and the utilization, the farmers are utilizing it so well. Now, what could be the problem? And we found out that one of the underlying problems the income of the farmer, because for a farmer to make use of the technology, the farmer must be able to afford a smartphone that at least can accommodate the technology for their use. Also, the access to capital, that is the availability of capital, is also an issue for for farmers to adequately utilize these technologies on the smartphones. Then another factor we discovered is a perceived benefit factor, which has to do with after using the technology, what's the impact of that technology to the household? Also, the accuracy of the technology when it is being used for feed mapping and planning. Those are factors under considerably, because it is presumed that if the technology fits to benefit them, of course the utilization will be increased. Then another factor we found out in our study is technology enablers. The technology enablers concept has to come from availability of infrastructures that support the use of the technology among the farmers. Also, alternative power sources, as we all know in Africa, there is a problem of steady power supply in Nigeria. So it's part of the identified technology enablers that will influence the utilization of such technology.
Okay, so allow me to interject a bit. Dr. Olajide. My question is this: you have really looked at this problem from a marketing value chain management perspective, B2B, B2C, C2C platforms for information exchange amongst farmers. But how about the place of technology in value addition? Where do you see technology in value addition, particularly within agribusiness value chains in Africa? Do you see local enterprises participating effectively? Are we reducing food waste and glut during high production seasons? Are we getting value for money through value addition, or we are still exporting raw? And where are the opportunities for enhancement within these value chains? Thank you very much.
Yes, we are getting some values using the technology, because it is beneficial, but not to the extent at which the scientists expected, and even the people that consume expected. But the impact on the value chain addition with agribusiness, of course, it's really doing well. Yes, it's beneficial.
All right. Thank you very much. What are the challenges with the technology adoption within agribusiness value chains, and where are the opportunities?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, by highlighting the challenges, one of the top identified challenges is the use of regulation. And this has to do with the protecting the farmers' information, because farmers, they are always curious to ask us where our informations are going to, what are the policies that is protecting the information that is being supplied into the smart information system that is giving them feedback. So it's a great challenge. It's a great challenge. And also the ecological threat that is being posed by the smart information system, that they keep inquiring and asking that what are the mechanisms put in place to eschew all ecological threats and harm posed by this information system. Then even the feedback mechanism, how adequate, how adequate, how adequate, how adequate and accurate are the feedback being gotten from this smart information system? Then also, of course, the problem of infrastructure. So those are the challenges.
All right.
Identified.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Opportunities. Okay.
Quickly, in 30 seconds. Opportunities in 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunities. According to our findings, it enables farmers to display their goods for patronage by in a form of marketing, and also it keeps farmers aware of the temperature ranges that will affect production timelines. Also, they use the technology to
Thank you.
fundraising and boost productivity, and then help them in sharing ideas, receiving desired information from.
All right, thank you, thank you, Dr. Olajide. I think now we have to bring the session to a close. Very quickly, any one or two questions before we give some terminal remarks? Any questions? Looks like, okay, yes. Where is the mic? Can we get help with the mic? Very quickly.
Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking presentation. I just want to ask the impact of technology, especially AI at the moment, on our democracy, on our peace transition, especially in Africa. Like I'm asking, like the reason being, there is huge and massive kind of backlash or pushback when it comes to say ICT or AI can influence in a very negative way the electoral outcome. I remember like the Cambridge Analytica like case when the deep fake or a lot of false information were passed to people like on their phones, which had to influence how somebody had to vote. So when it comes to Africa now, of course, it's 40% internet penetration, but those who are on internet, what is going to be the impact? And when we don't have the technology ourselves, we don't have like to control it. What, like how do you think we can mitigate the negative influence of them?
All right, yes.
Thank you so much for that question. And I can mostly speak for South Africa because that's where my research focuses on. But I think it really comes down to the citizens, because in South Africa there's been a significant push to uptake technology. There's a lot of work being done in the spaces of ICT, IoT, AI in various divisions, but there is still that resistance from the public. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And I know in South Africa, or in my community, we talk about our aunts or our moms who follow WhatsApp fake news and they receive a broadcast message. So I think those are the kinds of things that we need to work on and mitigate. Maybe my fellow panelists have a bit more insight into that, but yeah, that's from a South African perspective.
Dr. Satiana, Professor Sairam, any comments on the effect of technology, including AI, on sovereignty of state, governance issues, and how probably the discourse in the political space shapes up?
I can jump in real quick. I think this challenge is global. It's not limited to Africa. I live in the US, and this is a challenge we're dealing with. And I'm in Accra right now. We have elections, so it's global. I think my fellow panelist is right. It's two-pronged. There is a space for regulation. I think when I talk about China, people assume there's a direction I'm going to go in, but China actually has pretty decent AI regulation that controls what can be let out into the public sphere. There are penalties for deepfakes. There are limitations on taking people's likeness for certain things. And so you can argue that depending on the kind of government system you have, some kind of regulation can be targeted at this kind of space. On the other hand, there's citizen literacy as well, right? Which is what the South Africa case was bringing out, which is working with the public through public entities, whether it's through specific media organizations or non-governmental organizations, to help people. But the challenge is really tricky. It's really difficult. I mean, there have been a number of tests that have shown, it's really difficult to identify a deep fake from something that is actually real. So in the so-called post-truth era, this challenge is global, and it's going to take multiple actors: regulation, public literacy, in terms of at least identifying some of the basic misinformation. And a lot of disinformation scholars are working on this. We're going to partner with them in the tactics that they use in other forms of media to help the public recognize and identify these things. And also not to be separate from the AI space, right? As much as I lobbied the question to Tatiana, AI is an important part of my own work, and it's important to understand what's happening so that we can be critical agents, right, as scholars with the public to sort of move understanding. Explainable AI is important so that people can understand what is happening on the technical side at various levels, and then we can intervene in these ways. I'll let Tatiana take over.
next week. And as we said, as we say, this is the year of elections worldwide. So this is an issue everyone's grappling with. What's interesting is that conversations about the global governance of AI. I mean, I'm not going to say regulation, but certainly the governance of AI. There is consensus that they should that AI needs to conform to universal human rights principles. And so that is probably the only point of consensus that I can see in these conversations, and that's across all of the various regional frameworks or national frameworks for AI that we're seeing. We have a very fragmented landscape, but also big tech, at least in principle, also subscribes to the universal human rights principles. So this is really, I think, the challenge of our time.
Thank you very much. Do we have any pressing questions? I want to close this session. Okay, just one. This last one here. Mike. Here, right here behind you.
This is after lunch session.
Thank you. Just as an addition to what Satyana has done, just a wonderful presentation. I'm studying external interventions on matters of elections in Africa at the PhD level. And the very moment you talk about global governance, a question arises of who governs who. And that in itself creates a room for states to work towards a self-system. And I'm really looking at it from a point of policies don't make themselves. People will sit down and craft them. What will, at the international level, what are they going to do to ensure that the set criteria, people have compliance, full compliance, because that is one of the weaknesses of international law that we have. But of course, AI has done wonderful in the medical world. It has increased precision on matters of surgery, and even in the manufacturing sector, and we have seen tremendous improvements.
Thank you very much. We'd like to bring the curtains down on this session. One is to thank and appreciate all our panelists. A hand clap for our panelists, please. We can do better. We can do better. We can do better. Thank you very much. My concluding remarks are this. Whereas technology presents opportunity for emerging economies, including those in the global south, and I think it's just a fancy word for some of the reality that exists. It's also built on the same foundations of barriers to economic trade and participation. The reality is, if you are in academia, if you are competing for an academic grant, you are up against maybe 30, 50 other people competing for the same grant. How do you enhance your chance of getting your grant funded? One, you write an excellent grant. Number two, there is a lot of political lobbying, and people will not accept this. So long as we are here, I ask how many lobby for these things, no one will raise their hand. But the truth of the matter is, there is no space that is not contested. There is no freely available space that is waiting for Africa to show up and occupy. The world is occupied, the commerce space, the geopolitical space, all the spaces are occupied. The only way that Africa gets its voice heard at any level is to fight for those rights, to fight fair, but to fight hard, realizing that we are trying to take what is already in another person's mouth, and therefore the courage that is required to do that is a lot. But otherwise, the trends are encouraging. We all have access to eco-technology. What we choose to do with that technology is what makes all the difference. As far as information and disinformation are concerned, as to who called who garbage and whose tongue slipped while he was trying to refer to that garbage, again creates a lot of controversy on how information is communicated and conveyed in the public space, and how hungry people are are to stick to their alignment, but leveraging the mistakes made by others. I thank you all for your time and for your contribution and participation to this session. And I think with that, we call it a session. Thank you very much to those across the Atlantic and those within other spaces. Thank you.
Very much. I think we need to give a round of applause to the moderator. You know, this moderator is a friend of mine, but I didn't quite know that he has moderation skills of this nature. So, you know, you think you know someone until you see them in their element. You see them, you know, performing, because he has helped us save quite a lot of time. And of course, some of the colleagues on the call, like Seiram and Tatiana, are long-standing, you know, friends in the academic space. I've known Tatiana for nearly 15 years, Seiram we've been doing the same work 10 years plus. And it looks like in the AI space, governance is a big issue. So, you know, the initiatives we take from today going forward might revolve around the governance of AI and emerging technologies on the global stage, in the regions, at the AU level, in the countries. I'm not too sure Kenya has an AI Act. I know that the AU came up with ICT policy. I think it's called ICT transformation or something. Mr. Wanyama wants to say something. He's been inspired. Yeah. Teknolojia Akili Munemba. I think that Munemba must be a really tough thing. Eh? Is it from Zanzibar or something? But I think we've come to the end of this session. We'll try and get our colleagues in the other session to join us, but let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much.